We have a critical and profoundly sensitive topic for our analysis today. We're undertaking a thorough examination of the extensive source material detailing the 2021 kidnapping, rape, and murder of Sarah Everard.
It's a case that became so much more than a single tragic incident.
Yes, it really served as a brutal revealer of deep and persistent systemic failures, exposing profound issues about women's safety, the culture within the UK police service, and the very nature of public trust. Before we go into the facts, we just want to acknowledge the immense gravity of the material we're about to discuss. Our thoughts are always with Sarah Everard, her family, and all those who have suffered from the betrayal of public trust that this case represents.
Absolutely.
We'll be treating this source material and the memory of the victim with the utmost respect.
It's essential we maintain that focused approach. The body of information we've synthesized for you today covers, well, three main areas. There's the precise, chilling timeline of the incident itself, the deep failures in police vetting and internal culture that allowed the perpetrator, Wayne Couzens, to hold his position.
Yeah.
And finally, the explosive governmental and public responses that followed.
And the Angelini inquiry will be central to that.
It will. Our analysis will frequently refer to its key findings and recommendations, because that inquiry investigated exactly how Couzens was permitted to serve.
To give you the proper context, let's briefly profile Sarah Everard. She was born in Surrey in 1987. She grew up in York and attended Fulford School.
A bright student. She went on to study human geography at Durham University.
Right. And at the time of her disappearance, she was living in the Brixton Hill area of London, working as a marketing executive for a digital media agency.
The sources describe her as caring, fun-filled, and utterly talented.
A vibrant young woman with a full life ahead of her. The nature of this crime, I think, makes it imperative to remember the life that was lost. So let's unpack the timeline of the abduction on March 3rd, 2021. What strikes you immediately about the perpetrator's planning is the calculated use of deception.
Deception specifically tailored to his role as a police officer.
Exactly.
The crime was meticulously planned, yet it was executed with incredible speed. Sarah Everard was simply walking home.
From a friend's house near Clapham Common, walking to her own home in Brixton Hill.
And Couzens, critically, was an off-duty Metropolitan Police Constable. But he was assigned to the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch, the PDP.
Meaning he was trained and entrusted to guard some of the most sensitive locations in the country. And the power of that office was his primary weapon. He didn't use force, not initially. He used authority.
It was a truly egregious, calculated abuse of that authority. The sources are clear. Couzens stopped Everard, displayed his police warrant card, and immediately handcuffed her.
And the subsequent judicial commentary on this. It's crucial, isn't it?
It is. The trial judge, Lord Justice Fulford, later determined that Couzens had almost certainly claimed he was arresting her.
For what?
For breaching the stringent COVID-19 guidelines that were in place at the time.
Which would have seemed plausible to anyone watching.
Precisely. This tactic neutralized any immediate resistance or, suspicion from passersby. The scene would have just looked like a legitimate, if maybe harsh, police action.
And this detail, the fabricated COVID arrest, is what elevated the crime in the eyes of the law, correct? It's the institutional betrayal.
It is the core aggravating factor. The judge specifically highlighted during sentencing that this exploitation of state power to detain her was the vital factor that justified the maximum punishment.
It wasn't just a murder.
No. It turned a horrific murder into an attack on the fundamental trust that we as citizens must place in law enforcement.
Let's follow Couzens' actions that day. He finishes a 12-hour shift guarding the U.S. Embassy that morning. Then he does something odd. He travels to Kent to collect a hired white Vauxhall Crossland.
Not his personal vehicle. And that's evidence of premeditation right there. Why hire a specific car? To mask his identity, to hide his connection to the Met. He then drove back to the Clapham area around 9:23 p.m.
And just 5 minutes later, at 9:28 p.m., Everard is captured on doorbell camera footage on Coinders Road.
The timing is just chilling.
And within 6 minutes of that sighting, she was gone.
Yes, abducted around 9:34 p.m., Couzens had parked the hired Vauxhall on the pavement near Pointers Court. The speed with which he operated.
The warrant card, the handcuffs.
It all indicates a rapid, professionalized operation. He was, shockingly, leveraging police training against a civilian. Bus CCTV captured the Vauxhall's number plate shortly afterward, which confirmed the kidnapping was in progress.
He didn't stay in London, though. He immediately drove her away from the city.
Drove directly to Kent. And the transition point is notable. By 11:43 p.m., so just over 2 hours after the abduction, the source material confirms they had moved from the hired car into Cousins' personal seat car in Dover.
And it was in the hours following that the worst happened.
Yes. The violent crimes, the rape and strangulation took place. The timeline suggests the murder, which was confirmed as compression of the neck, occurred using his police duty belt.
His own police belt.
His own belt. It likely happened before 1:45 a.m. on March 4th. He was later seen buying drinks at a Dover petrol station, displaying a chilling level of calm after committing the act.
The efforts he took to conceal the crime were equally calculated and systematic. Again, you see him drawing on his specialized background.
Indeed. He drove to Hode's Wood, near Ashford. He owned a small plot of land there.
So he knew the area intimately.
That local knowledge was key to his plan. The disposal attempts spanned several days. On March 5th, he bought a petrol container and returned to the wood, where he burned her body inside a refrigerator he had already placed there.
A refrigerator. I mean, that detail alone underscores the lengths he went to.
It speaks to a prepared, detached methodology. Then, on March 7th, he continued the disposal. He purchased 2 large builder's bags from a B&Q store.
And used one of them.
He used one of those bags to contain her remains, which he then disposed of in a pond near his plot of land.
He was trying to erase every trace.
Every link back to himself. He also separately disposed of her mobile phone in a watercourse in Sandwich that same morning. It was systematic.
And all this time, the investigation is starting up in London.
It is. Sarah Everard's boyfriend reported her missing later on March 4th. The immediate investigation focused on tracking her movements, which, very quickly led detectives to that distinctive, hired Vauxhall Crossland captured on the bus CCTV.
And that car was the key.
It led them directly to the rental agency, which in turn led them straight to Wayne Couzens.
What about Couzens' actions in the days leading up to his arrest? Was he just carrying on as normal?
No. On March 8th, he reported himself ill from work.
A common tactic.
It is a way for offenders to try to create distance from a crime scene. He handed in his equipment, including the very police belt and handcuffs he had used to commit the crime, but the net was closing fast.
So he's arrested on March 9th.
Yes, at his home in Deal on suspicion of kidnapping. And crucially, evidence later showed he had attempted to wipe the data from his mobile phone just 40 minutes before the officers arrived. A clear, desperate attempt to destroy digital evidence.
The search for Sarah then shifted to Kent.
Remains were discovered just a day later, on March 10th, in Rhodeswood. They were only about 100 meters from Couzens' own land.
And identification was confirmed soon after.
On March 12th, via dental records. At that point, Couzens was rearrested for murder.
And his initial defense. It wasn't silence, was it? It was this elaborate and, frankly, unbelievable lie.
He went from outright denial, claiming he didn't even know Everard, to a completely fabricated narrative. It was intended to just deflect the crime.
What did he claim?
He told investigators he was being blackmailed by a gang of Eastern Europeans. He said he'd underpaid a prostitute earlier and that this gang had threatened his family, forcing him to kidnap and deliver another girl as repayment.
A story that was just preposterous.
It was an attempt to confuse the investigation, maybe lessen his culpability. It only further demonstrated his calculated malice. He was trying to maintain a facade of being a victim forced into a situation rather than a predator using his badge.
We've established the calculated nature of the crime, but what makes this case so damaging to public trust is the undeniable fact that the system had multiple glaring opportunities to intervene.
It did.
Wayne Couzens was not an unknown entity. He was a known risk who slipped through multiple safety nets.
And this section is really the core of our examination, the systemic failures. If we trace Couzens' career, you see a pattern of failure followed by elevation. He failed 3 separate times to become a police officer.
3 times?
Before eventually succeeding as a special constable with Kent Police in 2006. He then served as an armed officer with the Civil Nuclear Constabulary from 2011, before finally joining the Metropolitan Police Service in September 2018.
And then he gets a position in a specialized, highly sensitive unit, the PDP. How was that transfer handled? What were the vetting failures there?
This is a critical point that the Angelini inquiry just hammered home. Couzens was able to transfer into the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch, a high-status role requiring absolute public trust relatively quickly.
And the sources show 2 huge lapses here.
They do. First, he did not undergo the enhanced vetting specific to the PDP branch before his transfer. Second, He bypassed the mandatory 2-year probation period that's typically required before joining such a specialized unit.
So the failure wasn't just in missing past incidents.
No, it was in allowing a fast track into a position of immense authority without adequate scrutiny.
But why would a specialized unit like that have relaxed vetting? I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive given their responsibility for national security sites.
Well, it often boils down to things like resource allocation and perceived urgency. Specialized units might prioritize experienced officers, and sometimes that leads to a rubber stamping process or, over-reliance on previous vetting from other forces.
And the Angelini inquiry's conclusion on this.
It was a damning assessment. It was commissioned specifically to investigate how Cousins was allowed to serve. And its conclusion was, well, it was unequivocal.
What were the absolute key findings of Part 1 of that inquiry? It was published in February 2024.
The inquiry stated, without any ambiguity, that Cousins should never have been a police officer at all. The report explicitly found that his crimes against Sarah Everard were the culmination of a trajectory of sexually motivated behavior and offending.
So this wasn't a sudden break, it was an escalation.
Exactly. And the inquiry resulted in 16 specific recommendations designed to close the loopholes that allowed him to abuse the power of the office of constable, focusing heavily on vetting and internal culture.
So let's detail those red flags, because they span nearly 2 decades and involve multiple police forces. This shows a complete breakdown in information sharing and really prioritization of risk.
We can trace the issues back as far as 2002, with an incident that the vetting processes reportedly failed to capture, but the more documented incidents are deeply disturbing.
Let's start with 2008.
Take the 2008 allegation. A radio presenter, Emma B., reported Cousins for indecently exposing himself in Greenwich. Her account is shocking. She stated that the police officers she spoke to at the time actually laughed at her and effectively took no action.
So, an alleged sexually motivated offense reported to the police about a decade before he even joined the Met was met with institutional dismissal and mockery. That says a lot about the culture.
It suggests that crimes of indecent exposure were systemically downgraded in severity or treated as minor incidents, which is something we'll come back to later when we discuss prevention.
And then there's 2015.
Right. In 2015, while he was an armed officer with the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, Kent police received a report of a man believed to be Cousins naked from the waist down in a car in Dover. Police later had to admit that their systems might have contained enough information to identify him at the time, but again, the matter was dropped or just not aggressively pursued.
We have to ask how the vetting processes, whether for the Civil Nuclear Constabulary or the Met, failed to flag these 2 clear instances of sexually deviant behavior reported to official police bodies.
Well, the sources suggest a lack of sophisticated cross-referencing between forces and a failure to prioritize allegations of indecent exposure, especially when they didn't lead to an immediate prosecution.
So vetting focuses on convictions, not allegations.
It tends to, yes, heavily on criminal convictions, not always on allegations that were investigated, but led to no further action. And this reliance on convictions allowed Cousins to continually present a clean record.
And the final warnings came right up to the week of the murder itself.
Days before the murder, in February 2021, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, the IOPC, was actively investigating reports that Cousins had indecently exposed himself at a McDonald's drive-thru in Swanley, Kent.
On 2 separate occasions.
2 separate occasions. He was literally questioned about these allegations before he killed Sarah Everard.
The failure to act on those immediate, concrete reports, it had direct, fatal consequences.
Absolutely. The investigation into these specific exposure counts was handled by the Metropolitan Police itself, and it was found to be grossly negligent. A former Met officer, Samantha Lee, was later found guilty of gross misconduct for failing to properly investigate those 2 counts.
So this wasn't just a failure of a paper system.
No, it was a failure of duty by individual officers.
And beyond the paperwork and the vetting failures, the sources also paint a vivid, disturbing picture of the internal culture Cousins operated in.
This is perhaps the most shocking evidence of willful blindness. Consider this anecdote. Cousins' colleagues once had to call him back to the station from patrol because a prostitute had arrived at the station demanding money from him.
Which suggests his colleagues were aware of his involvement in sex work and potentially illegal activities.
It does.
And then there's the infamous, sickening nickname.
The reports indicated that some of his colleagues had allegedly nicknamed him the rapist.
3 years before the murder.
3 years before. This isn't just a failure to follow protocol. It indicates a toxic, corrosive culture where extreme sexual deviance was known, joked about, or at least normalized, to the extent that it didn't trigger immediate, serious reporting or disciplinary action. The failure here rests squarely on the shoulders of those colleagues and supervisors who chose not to act.
And this toxicity wasn't confined to Cousins alone, as evidenced by the subsequent investigations into his social circle within the force.
That's right. The sources revealed wider misconduct issues, reinforcing that culture of impunity. In 2022, two of Cousins' colleagues, PC Jonathan Coven and former PC Joel Borders, were jailed.
For what?
For sending grossly offensive, misogynistic, racist, and homophobic messages in a WhatsApp group that included Cousins. This shows a deep-seated contempt for women and professional standards operating within the force. Furthermore, in the aftermath of the murder, several other officers faced disciplinary action for accessing confidential files related to the case without any legitimate policing purpose.
Just looking out of curiosity.
Exactly. 3 officers, for instance, were dismissed or disciplined in November 2024 for sharing inappropriate material or accessing files without authorization. This cascade of misconduct demonstrates a significant lack of professional judgment and integrity that was endemic within certain parts of the Met.
Despite the deeply concerning revelations about the systemic failings, the criminal legal process against Cousins moved forward swiftly in 2021. So let's chart the legal milestones.
Okay. Cousins was charged with kidnapping and murder on March 12, 2021. He made his first appearances at Westminster Magistrates Court and then the Old Bailey that same month. The timing of his pleas became a really important moment for the police institutionally.
He didn't initially plead guilty to everything, correct?
That's right. On June 8th, he pleaded guilty to kidnapping and rape, finally admitting responsibility for those horrific actions. However, the murder plea was delayed, pending psychological and medical reports.
And it wasn't until July 9th that he formally pleaded guilty to murder.
Yes, and that moment was crucial. Cressida Dick, who was the Met Police Commissioner at the time, made a public statement expressing her personal feeling of being sickened, angered, and devastated, and she acknowledged the sense of betrayal felt across the policing community.
The sentencing in September 2021 was a definitive moment. What was the exact nature of the sentence and the legal rationale behind it?
On September 30, 2021, Lord Justice Fulford sentenced Cousins to life imprisonment with a whole life order.
And that's a crucial distinction.
It is. A standard life sentence typically involves a minimum term, after which the offender can apply for parole. A whole life order means exactly what it says: imprisonment until death, never eligible for release. It's reserved for the most heinous crimes.
And the judge was very clear about why this case met that exceptional threshold.
He was. Lord Justice Fulford made it explicit that the vital factor justifying the whole life tariff was Cousins' use of his status as a police officer to falsely detain Everard. This legal precedent really sets the case apart.
The abuse of state authority.
Yes. The courts viewed that abuse and the resulting attack on public trust as an exceptional, aggravating feature that warranted the maximum possible punishment. Cousins challenged the severity. He tried to appeal the whole life sentence, but that application was rejected by the Court of Appeal in July 2022. He remains imprisoned at HM Prison Franklin.
Following his conviction, the legal reckoning continued with charges related to that trajectory of his prior offenses.
Precisely. In March 2022, he faced additional charges. 4 counts of indecent exposure related to alleged incidents in Kent in 2020 and 2021, and these were separate from the McDonald's incidents the IOPC had investigated.
And did he plead guilty to those?
He eventually pleaded guilty to 3 of those counts in February 2023. This outcome reinforced the Angiolini inquiry's finding that he was on a clear, escalating path of sexually motivated behavior. These charges retroactively highlighted the severe consequences of the prior institutional failures to act on those non-contact offenses.
Another surprising legal issue that surfaced post-conviction concerned money, specifically his police pension. How did that work?
It became a significant public debate. Despite being dismissed from the Met, UK law is complicated regarding pensions earned during public service. Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, successfully applied to have Cousins stripped of his Metropolitan Police pension.
But there was more to it than that.
Yes, the controversy centered on a potential entitlement to a separate pension, estimated to be around £7,000 a year earned from his prior service with other forces, like the Civil Nuclear Constabulary.
So even after being convicted of abusing his position and receiving a whole life sentence, he might still be entitled to a public-funded income.
That was the contentious point. While efforts were successful in stripping the Met pension, the other pensions remained legally challenging to revoke because of complex rules governing transfers and accrued rights across different public sector bodies. This fueled public anger, underscoring the perception that the system continued to protect the perpetrator even in minor ways.
The conviction and sentencing were the end of the criminal case, but they were only the beginning of a massive national reckoning. The murder of Sarah Everard triggered a deep societal debate that transcended the details of the crime itself.
It certainly did. The case instantly galvanized a national conversation about violence against women and girls, VAWG, and the fundamental safety of women in public spaces.
And the fact that the perpetrator was a police officer.
Well, that injected an element of profound institutional mistrust into that conversation.
We saw immediate political admission that the system was failing.
Home Secretary Priti Patel and London Mayor Sadiq Khan both publicly acknowledged the harsh reality. London streets were simply not safe for women or girls.
A stunning admission.
It was. And this public admission of institutional failure immediately put pressure on the government to act. They reopened the public consultation on their VAWG strategy, and the response was overwhelming. It received an astonishing 160,000 additional responses in a matter of weeks, which just demonstrates the depth of public pain and anger.
This anger manifested publicly in the planned countrywide vigils, which then became a major source of controversy due to the strict COVID-19 rules in place in March 2021.
That weekend was highly charged. Vigils were planned for March 13th by the group Reclaim These Streets. However, police chiefs, allegedly urged by Priti Patel herself, advised the organizers that the gatherings would be illegal under the severe pandemic regulations.
So many events were officially canceled.
But hundreds of people still gathered near the site of the abduction at Clapham Common.
And the scene at Clapham was poignant, even attracting high-profile attendees.
Yes, Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, attended quietly to pay her respects. She later issued a statement confirming she understood what it was like for women to feel unsafe walking alone in London before her marriage.
Despite the dignified purpose of the gathering, the Metropolitan Police's response was, well, it was aggressive and deeply controversial.
It was a catastrophic public relations disaster for the police. The Met moved forcefully to break up the crowd, arguing they were enforcing COVID regulations. This led to 4 arrests for public order offenses.
And the images were broadcast internationally.
Yes. Police officers aggressively manhandling and cuffing attendees, including Patsy Stevenson, and the trampling of flowers laid in tribute. It triggered immediate political condemnation.
Senior figures, including Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, expressed profound concern. Sadiq Khan called the police actions neither appropriate nor proportionate.
Initial internal reviews offered limited criticism. The HMICFRS found that the police had technically acted appropriately regarding the COVID rules.
A technicality.
Yet simultaneously conceded the event was a public relations disaster that severely eroded confidence. But the legal challenges that followed are where the real analysis lies.
So what was the outcome of the legal challenge against the Met's handling of the vigil?
4 women from Reclaim These Streets launched a legal challenge. In March 2022, the High Court delivered a landmark ruling. It found that the Met's decisions regarding the vigil organizers' human rights, specifically the rights to freedom of speech and assembly, were not in accordance with the law.
So the police had got the law wrong.
The court essentially ruled that the Met had misunderstood and unlawfully applied the pandemic regulations to shut down a legitimate protest. The Met tried to appeal this, but was blocked.
And the final consequence for the police.
The Metropolitan Police were ultimately forced to apologize and pay substantial damages to the women who had initiated the legal action and those who were arrested. This legal outcome proved that the police had not only failed culturally in vetting cousins, but they had also failed legally in their handling of the subsequent public outcry.
The second major public controversy involved the advice the Met issued following Cousin's sentencing.
This advice was perhaps the most spectacular example of institutional tone deafness. The Met suggested that women stopped by a lone officer should consider shouting out to a passerby, running into a house, knocking on a door, waving a bus down, or calling 999.
Which immediately placed the burden of safety squarely back on the potential victim.
Absolutely. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Commentators and politicians pointed out that this advice failed entirely to recognize that Kovillans used his authority to stage a false arrest.
And trying to flee a uniformed officer.
Could expose an innocent individual to potential charges of resisting arrest. MP Jess Phillips, who is cited in our sources, was among the most vocal critics, pointing out the absurdity of expecting a woman to debate the legitimacy of an arrest in a dark street.
This advice unfortunately mirrored the victim-blaming sentiment expressed by a public official.
Yes, the comments made by the North Yorkshire Police Fire and Crime Commissioner Philip Allott. He faced intense calls for resignation after suggesting that women needed to be streetwise and understand the law concerning arrests, implying Sarah Everard should never have submitted to the false arrest.
Which fundamentally missed the point.
It did. The point that a police badge represents absolute authority and trust. Following a unanimous vote of no confidence and immense public pressure, Allott was forced to apologize and resign.
Eventually, this widespread criticism compelled institutional reform efforts, all designed to begin rebuilding public trust.
The Met took some immediate steps. They announced they would halt the deployment of lone plainclothes officers. The government commissioned the HMIC-FRS report, which concluded that offenses related to violence against women and girls needed a radical refocus and shift in priority.
What did that mean in practice?
It argued these crimes must be treated with the same institutional seriousness as terrorism or organized crime.
There was also a significant technology proposal aimed at direct public safety.
The Walk Me Home proposal. This was advanced by the BT chief executive Philip Jansen. It was a potential new 888 phone service that would use GPS to track lone women.
And if they didn't arrive on time?
The system would automatically alert emergency contacts or the police. Home Secretary Priti Patel enthusiastically supported this initiative, framing it as a concrete step toward improving safety.
But did the 888 service ever materialize?
Despite the initial political enthusiasm and urgency, the service was eventually canceled in April 2023. The sources indicate this was largely due to complexity, cost, and the difficulty of integrating such a service effectively into existing emergency infrastructure.
So another example of the gap between political promise and practical implementation.
Unfortunately, yes.
Finally, let's talk about the inquiries. Initially, Prime Minister Boris Johnson ruled out an immediate public inquiry, but the pressure became too great.
The government eventually commissioned a full statutory public inquiry to investigate the systematic failures that allowed Cosensus to serve. And it's important to note the scope here.
It wasn't just one inquiry.
No. Alongside the Angelini inquiry, which focused narrowly on Cousins' specific history and immediate vetting failures, Baroness Casey of Blackstock was appointed to lead a separate independent review into the Metropolitan Police's wider culture, recruitment, training, and vetting processes.
So a dual-track approach.
It acknowledged that the problem went far beyond one man. And following the Angelini findings, Home Secretary James cleverly announced in early 2024 that officers charged with certain offenses, particularly those related to sexual or violent misconduct, would face automatic suspension from duty. A direct policy change responding to the systemic lapses.
And lastly, for the public record, the story was revisited in a major documentary.
Yes, the 2024 BBC documentary, Sarah Everard, The Search for Justice. It was produced with the consent of her family and provided important new context, including previously unreleased footage of Cousins' arrest and detailed interviews with the lead investigating officer. It gave the public a deeper understanding of the meticulous work required to track him down. So stepping back, the sources demonstrate clearly that the murder of Sarah Everard was a transformative event. It quickly escalated past a tragic criminal event into a nationwide structural audit of the police institution, a critical examination of embedded cultural failures, and a necessary, if painful, societal discussion about women's fundamental rights to safety in public spaces.
What's truly striking, now that we've reviewed the career trajectory and the systemic response, is the sheer repeated failure of the institution to connect the dots. We saw a long history of sexually motivated behavior.
Allegations in 2008, 2015, and right before the murder in 2021.
All of which were either missed during inadequate vetting or failed to result in meaningful disciplinary action. The evidence is overwhelming. Cousins had been flagged repeatedly, yet the system protected him, allowing him to maintain and eventually exploit a position of profound public trust.
And this leads us directly to the criminological perspective that the inquiry's aftermath highlighted. Drawing on the arguments of experts like Jennifer Grant and Fiona Vera Gray, the source material compels us to reconsider how we categorize non-contact offenses like indecent exposure.
We tend to view those as lesser crimes, perhaps annoying or unsettling, but not necessarily precursors to violence.
That traditional view is precisely what the experts are arguing against. Grant's research suggests a critical link between non-contact offenses and later physical sexual offenses, noting that a significant percentage of men who commit indecent exposure later escalate to serious physical crimes. The frequency of Cosette's exposure allegations should have been treated as a severe warning sign, not a minor distraction. As Fiona Gray noted, the criminal justice system needs to do more to understand that the thinking process of the mind of somebody who would drive around and expose themselves is very similar to the thinking process of someone who then would later go on to abduct, kidnap, rape, or murder somebody.
So it's not about punishment alone.
It's about prevention through early intervention.
If the 2008, 2015, or even the February 2021 reports had been logged, connected, and investigated with the seriousness of a potential trajectory towards violence, the opportunities for intervention, for removing cousins from the force, and seeking psychological assessment would have been numerous.
Exactly. The case forces society to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that the person who committed this heinous crime was able to exploit the very authority that is meant to protect us, because that authority had repeatedly ignored the signs of his predatory behavior.
The recommendations from the inquiry?
The legacy of the Angiolini inquiry, the recommendations for automatic suspension for certain offenses, and the legal ruling confirming the public's right to protest institutional failure are all direct, hard-won consequences of this tragedy.
Ultimately, the long-term success of the reforms will be measured not by the existence of new policies, but by how thoroughly and consistently those systemic flaws are rooted out, and whether the system can finally earn back the trust it so violently betrayed. That's the challenge left for the institutions that failed Sarah Everard. Thank you for joining us for this extensive analysis of complex and deeply important source material. Thanks for listening.